What if that nagging feeling in the back of your neck was real? What if those hands reaching out from the dark that you believed were there were there? What if the monster in the basement really existed? And what if there was really something under the bed? Would you have the courage to face your fears?
Hello, brave souls. Tonight's story is called Accountant versus Zombie. I think this might be a fun story, at least for me, because that's what I am. I'm an accountant during the day. I read these spooky stories at night. So hopefully enjoy this it's just a breakdown of him trying to survive a day at the very beginning of the zombie apocalypse. So I hope you enjoy. The Ungodly Day. It was just another monotonous morning for Gary Wilkin, CPA. He sat at his desk staring at columns of numbers on the computer screen, trying to make sense of the client's messy finances. His daily grind gas station coffee had long gone cold and stale. Just another day at the office for an overworked accountant in the city. That's when the screams began. At first, it seemed like a commotion out in the street. Gary swiveled in his chair to look out the window at the chaos unfolding below. People were running and stampeding down the sidewalks, looks of sheer terror on their faces. Something was very wrong. His first thought that it was just another terrorist attack or mass shooting incident. Those had become all too common in recent years. This felt different, more widespread and bizarre. That's when the first blood-curdling scream echoed through the office. It came from the lobby area. Then another, and another. Horrible wet crunching sounds mixed with the shrieking. What the hell? Gary grabbed the aluminum baseball bat he kept by his desk, mostly as an intimidating conversation piece, and headed out to investigate. The scene that awaited in the lobby foyer made his jaw drop. Bodies strewn about, blood and entrails everywhere. And there were people tearing into the bodies with their bare hands and teeth, ripping them apart and eating their remains. Monsters, cannibals, not people, Gary tried to rationalize. Except they looked just like normal people. His friend Bob from payroll was hunched over an eviscerated body, his blue dress shirt now soaked with dark stains, flesh and tendons dangling from his teeth. Gary, help me! Oh God, help me! The voice called out. Cheryl, one of the admins, was backing away from the grisly feeding frenzy, eyes wide with shock. Without hesitation, Gary rushed over and swung the bat, cracking it across the skull of the nearest flesh eater, sending him tumbling in a heap. He grabbed Cheryl by the arm, and they sprinted for the stairwell, mowing down any others that got in their path. As they burst outside into the open air, the city had already descended into complete pandemonium all around them. Fires raged in the distance, car crashes and explosions rocked the streets, and there were those people, those infected ghouls, roaming and shambling about, aimlessly attacking anything that moved. The reports started trickling in from the radio and emergency broadcast systems. Everywhere was being hit with this plague, this reign of the undead. The dead were rising to attack the living. Mass hysteria, panic in the streets. The world as they knew it was ending. Gary reached into his pocket and clutched a little silver ST medallion he'd been attending AA meetings for. He hadn't had a drink in 8 months. Somehow, he knew those days were over. It was going to be a long night, an even longer road ahead. He glanced over at Cheryl, her face streaked with tears and panic. At least for now, they had each other, for whatever that was worth, in this new, ungodly reality. The sounds of chaos echoed all around them as the evening sun began to set over the cityscape. Gary knew they needed to find shelter and safety, quickly before nightfall. Stumbling half-dazed through the streets, they noticed a small convenience store up ahead that seemed relatively intact. This way! Gary hissed, pulling Cheryl with him as they sprinted for the store's entrance. He pounded on the locked doors until a frantic clerk inside cautiously opened up to let them scramble inside. A few other disheveled survivors were already inside as well, barricading the windows and doors with shelving units and whatever supplies they could find. You folks okay? The clerk eyed them suspiciously as Gary and Cheryl bent over, hands on their knees trying to catch their breath. We made it out of the office, Cheryl sputtered between heavy breaths. Those things were everywhere, eating people. Tell me about it, the clerk shook his head gravely. Whole damn city's gone to hell in a handbasket from what we've seen on the news. Riots, looting, and then those sickos started showing up. From the small portable TV behind the counter, the emergency news broadcast was repeating the same dire warnings on a continuous loop, advising citizens to stay indoors, avoid all contact with those who have been infected, and not to engage them under any circumstances. The military was being deployed to contain the situation and establish quarantine areas. But how, Gary thought, could you quarantine something like this when it was already everywhere? One of the other survivors, a man in a tattered blue business suit, was pressing his face up against the glass trying to peer outside. "There's more of them coming!" he shouted back in a panicked voice. "Did anyone see how this whole nightmare started?" Gary shook his head slowly, still in shock. It truly was like a nightmare you couldn't wake up from. Just hours ago, he was doing taxes and making copies like any other mind-numbing day. He looked around at the pitiful little group of haggard survivors surrounding him now as the sickening groans of the undead grew closer outside. "Anyone know what we should do?" He tried to steady his voice and stay strong. As unlikely as it seemed, Gary felt an increasing sense that he might be the one to lead them through this, at least for tonight. "Maybe we should make a run for it," the young woman clutching a newborn baby to her chest suggested meekly. "Run where?" Gary didn't say it out loud, but nowhere seemed safe anymore. The only choice was to hunker down here for as long as they could and try to outlast the horrors unfolding outside those walls. He started working on reinforcing the entrance, determined to try and prepare a fortified safe haven for their scrappy little group to survive the night. As the dead congregated outside, pawing and clawing at the glass, their guttural moans of ravenous hunger growing louder and more inhuman, Gary knew it would be a very long night indeed. But for tonight at least, he would do whatever it took to protect these people and ensure they all lived to see another day, even if that new day promised nothing but utter desolation and hell on earth. The incessant pounding and scratching of the barricaded doors and windows never let up through the night. Gary could hardly believe those things. Those mindless ghouls didn't require any rest or reprieve from their relentless efforts to reach the living prey inside the little convenience store. He did what he could to fortify their defenses, stacking shelves and whatever supplies were available to board up any weaknesses. But truth be told, Gary knew it was only a matter of time before their flimsy fortress was breached, especially if more of those undead horrors continued to join the mass outside. A small band of scraggly survivors huddled together through the long hours of darkness. Nobody dared make more than a whimper, for fear of attracting more unwanted attention to their location. They took turns keeping watch of the cracked security monitors that offered a live feed look at the surreal nightmare unfolding in the parking lot and streets surrounding them. The groaning, that ungodly groaning sound, would be forever seared into Gary's mind. It was the primal, guttural cry of pure, insatiable hunger, as if the very undead could sense and smell their prey like bloodhounds, growing more frenzied and ravenous by the hour. "Hey, I think that one used to be my boss," the man in the tattered suit whispered to Gary, pointing to the security feed to one of the putrid, disfigured corpses mindlessly clawing at the front doors. "I think they've all turned into those things," Gary grimaced. "Everyone we knew." The horrible realization started to sink in that this wasn't just an isolated outbreak. This unfolding nightmare was happening globally. Everyone. He felt a sinking pit of dread visualizing all the major cities being overrun by this tidal wave of living dead. How could anything stop this? Those are the terrifying thoughts that raced through Gary's mind as he clung to his aluminum baseball bat, his grip still slick with old blood and grime from the first attacks. At least it was a weapon, something to defend them, even if it was futile. A sudden loud crash rang out as one of the front windows cracked open. Shattered glass sprang everywhere as the rotted arm and hand came lurching inside, scrabbling wildly to pull itself through. The younger woman huddled in the corner let out a shriek of terror as he shielded her infant's face. Gary was on his feet in an instant, bringing the baseball bat down hard on the creature's arm until it severed completely with a nauseating crunch. "We can't stay here," he shouted over the deafening cacophony of 1,000 groans and growls now as more of the undead horde surged forward. "We need to move, now!" Cheryl and the clerk helped them ram a heavy shelf unit in front of the newly formed breach, using every ounce of their strength. But Gary knew it was only a temporary solution at best. How much longer could they withstand this onslaught of the damned? "Back door," the clerk instructed, If we can make it out the alleyway exit, maybe we can find another place to hide out. It was a slim chance, and they all knew it. But as Gary helped hoist the young mother to her feet, cradling her whimpering baby, he knew they had no other choice. With a terse nod to his ragtag group of survivors, he leveled his bat in hand and said to himself, "All right then, let's move out. If any of us are going to live to see tomorrow, we go together. Now." Gary kicked open the back door to the alleyway and immediately recoiled at the wave of putrid stench that hit him. More of those things were gathered in the narrow passageway between buildings, alerted by the sound of the door clattering open. He steeled himself and charged forward, bat raised high as he bashed through the first cluster of undead that turned to face them, with unseeing, ravenous hunger in their lifeless eyes. Cheryl was close behind him, wielding a pipe she'd found to knock them away as they pressed forward. "This way!" the clerk shouted, taking the lead and pointing them down a side path that seemed slightly more clear for the moment. Gary ushered the rest of the terrified survivors to follow, keeping himself between them and the closing circle of ghouls. The mother sobbed and clutched her wailing infant tightly to her chest. The businessman stumbled along looking half dazed with shock, as if he couldn't process this wasn't all some vivid nightmare to wake from. Cheryl swung her pipe in a wide arc, caving in the skulls of two former humans who shambled at her, indistinguishable from the rows of mindless undead except for their ripped business casual attire. She paused for the briefest second, panting to catch her breath, and Gary saw the gut-wrenching realization hit her. Those used to be their coworkers, their friends, their former lives. No time to grieve now. Gary yanked her arm, pulling her forward as they continued their desperate flight down the maze of trash-strewn alleyways. The sounds of savage snarls echoing all around them as the entire waking world had become a living hellscape of nightmares. Someone reached out and grabbed a fistful of Gary's shirt from behind, wheeling him around with surprising force and knocked him off balance. He came face to distorted face with one of the creatures, its lipless maw opening to reveal a trio of curved fangs dripping with clotted blood and gore. "Oh God, Karen!" The words caught in Gary's throat as he recognized the desiccated features of their former HR manager as his old accounting firm. Her gnarled fingers closed around his throat as she leaned in, hunger blazing in those dead milk-white eyes, jaws snapping wildly like a rabid dog mere inches from his face. He could smell the stench of death on her every exhale, a cold, grave-like miasma. Gary swung the bat in a wide arc, putting every ounce of strength he had in bashing the monster's skull. It felt like caving in a pumpkin as her head erupted in a spray of blackened gore and bone shards. She crumpled to the filthy pavement with a gurgling moan that trailed off in a chilling silence. "I'm so sorry," Gary muttered quietly, knowing there was no humanity left in the undead husk. If this was the fate of everyone he knew and loved, perhaps it was a mercy to put them out of their agony. The others stared at him with pale faces, as shocked by his act as Gary himself was. He realized with a pit of revulsion that Karen, that thing, used to be someone's wife, a daughter, a living, breathing human being like them not too long ago. We have to keep moving." The clerk's frantic shout broke the tension as their grisly fight for survival in this new literal hell on earth pressed on. They pressed on through the shadowy labyrinth of alleyways, not sure if they were heading towards any real safety, or just running in blind panic. Gary stayed at the rear of the group, bat at the ready to bash through any undead stragglers that pursued them. Every few minutes, another chorus of ravenous growls and the pitter-patter of clumsy, uncoordinated footsteps would start echoing from the darkness behind. That meant more of those things were honing in on their scent of life. Gary didn't know much about the insane reality they'd woken into. But he knew one thing. The undead were instinctively driven to hunt and consume whatever living flesh remained. Up ahead, he could see the flickering glow of streetlights from an open avenue. The clerk stopped and peered around the corner cautiously before waving them on. "This way! Hurry now! Move it!" They spilled out into the main road. Gary felt his stomach churn at the scene of utter desolation surrounding them. Abandoned cars were strewn everywhere, clouded into storefronts and street lamps. The crumbling edifice of a city bus stuck out of a brick facade. The bodies of those trapped inside pressed against the shattered windshield in a frozen, last rictus of terror. Thick black pillars of smoke stained the night sky crimson as raging fires raged unchecked throughout the cityscape. And as they walked among it all, hundreds, maybe thousands, aimlessly wandered the now deserted streets and sidewalks, some in tattered clothing, others completely naked and streaked with drying viscera. Many were hideously mauled, whole chunks of flesh and organs hanging loose from gaping open wounds that should have been fatal, but clearly no longer mattered to the undead. "We're not gonna make it," the frazzled businessman sputtered, looking on the verge of panic. The mother huddled low, cradling her fussing child and sobbing quietly in terror. "Yes, we are," Gary stated firmly, more conviction in his voice than he actually felt. "Just keep it together, keep moving in." He felt a telltale prickling in the back of his neck and spun around just as a snarling mouth of jagged teeth lunged from the shadows directly at him. Gary swung the bat in a powerful uppercut, shattering the creature's fetid jaw and sending shards of splintering bone and neon green pus spraying. It went down with an outraged gurgling howl, attracting the attention of a dozen more undead that immediately turned in their direction like sharks scenting a fresh kill. "Run!" Gary roared at the others as he laid into the first wave of attackers, clearing a path for them. Cheryl was by his side, swinging her length of pipe until it struck a glancing blow off one misshapen skull and wrenched free of her hands. "No, damn it!" She turned just as one of the frenzied undead creatures came barreling at her, shrieking like a banshee until its hungry jaws clamped down hard around her wrist. The clerk rushed over wielding a machete he'd found as Cheryl fell to the pavement, kicking and screaming for help. He hacked down in a savage arc, cleaving straight through the thing's neck and sending its snapping head tumbling free. Gary pulled Cheryl up to her feet, her entire forearm drenched crimson from the ragged bite wound. "Cheryl, oh God, you've been bitten!" he gasped, recoiling slightly as a wave of nausea at the implication washed over him. "What? No, please, Gary! Don't let them turn me into those things!" she cried, eyes pleading and welling with tears. A sudden anguished wail split the night as the mother stumbling towards them, cradling her infant protectively. Except it was far too late. The tiny bundle in her arms had been mauled beyond recognition by the undead teeth of a creature that now slumped behind her, skull caved in from the clerk's machete blows. She looked up with eyes devoid of any sentience. Streaked mascara tears carved lines down her expressionless face. "My baby. My beautiful baby," she uttered in a zombie trance as her own life drained away from her before crumpling to the pavement. Gary felt his stomach twist in a knot of anguished horror. He wanted to wrench at the sight of the mangled infant lying lifeless in his mother's arms. A wave of dizzying vertigo hit him as his mind struggled to process the depravity of what he was witnessing unfold. This couldn't be real. It was too nightmarish, too far beyond the realms of conceivable. And yet, the undead proof was everywhere, closing in around them like the clammy caress of the grave itself. "Gary, please." Cheryl's ragged voice pulled him back from the brink of stunned shock. He stared at the ragged bite mark on her arm, already discoloring in mottled shades of gangrenous rot as the vile infection took insidious hold. She knew, as well as he did, what it meant. That she was as good as dead, just delaying the inevitable horror transformation into one of those insatiable ghouls. The resignation in her eyes cut him deeper than any wound. The clerk suddenly shoved his way between them, machete raised as high as more of the undead horde lurched towards them. "We gotta get moving. You want to survive this godforsaken night or what?" Gary's eyes met Cheryl's in that endless, torturous split second of decision. He couldn't leave her behind. Not like this. No matter how excruciating and immersing it would be. With a trembling hand, he gently gripped her unbitten wrist and pulled her along as they fled. The straggling few other survivors surged ahead of them, the terrified businessman leading the way in blind flight. All around the streets were littered with abandoned vehicles, some with faintly glowing headlights still illuminating the path ahead amid the choking haze of smoke and fog. Up ahead loomed the hulking shapes of a vast enclosed parking structure, its multi-level tiers stretching skyward like some brutalist behemoth structure. A few of the undead milled about the structure's entrance, but the way ahead seemed clear for the moment. "There!" the clerk shouted, waving them forward with his machete. "Maybe we can make a stand in there, at least for a while." Gary looked back and felt his heart plummet. Dozens more of the nightmarish undead had joined the pursuit behind them. A veritable tidal wave of insatiable hunger and death had given animated form. Their thunderous snarls and howls of rage echoed through the desolate city streets as they closed the distance. Steeling himself, Gary firmed his grip on the bat and turned to face them as the others scrambled in the structure's entrance. "Gary, what are you doing?" the clerk bellowed as he opened a path for the ragged survivors to rush inside to safety. "Buying you all time," Gary shouted back, He wasn't sure what sort of insane plan was formulating in his mind. Maybe he had none at all. All he knew was that someone had to try and stem their relentless tide of undeath, if only for a few precious seconds. As the first of the shrieking ghouls bore down on him, Gary bellowed out a feral roar of his own and charged headlong at them, baseball bats swinging. The undead came at him in a teeming mass of snapping jaws and grasping putrid hands. Gary swung the bat in a wide, arcing frenzy, putting every last ounce of his being into each bludgeoning strike. Rotten skulls caved in with sickening wet crunches. Showers of clotted blood, bone shards, and viscera sprayed outwards with each shattering impact. But for every ghoul he managed to drop, 3 more took their place in the endlessly replenishing horde. A gnarled hand shot out and clamped around his throat with surprising inhuman strength. Jagged nails dug into his flesh as rotted lips peeled back, revealing a distended maw of curved fangs that lunged straight for his face. Gary recoiled just in time, smashing the bat down on the forearm, holding him until it broke with a resounding crack. The creature howled in mindless fury, recoiling just enough for Gary to get some range on his backswing. He swung the bat like a major league power hitter, putting his full weight behind the blow as it connected squarely with the fiend's skull in a grotesque explosion of ruptured bone and pulp brain matter. As it crumbled into an inert heap, he sensed movement from the corner of his eye and spun to face the next attacker. One of the only shreds of living humanity flickered across his mind. The accountant's split-second thought that these undead aberrations had likely all once been normal people too. Mothers, fathers, accountants, grocery clerks, all reduced to mindless cannibalistic ghouls driven by insatiable hunger. He spotted a smaller, clothed figure clawing her way towards him through the teeming ruck and felt a pang of recognition. Little Myrnie, who had come by his office every April to wrangle payments on her daughter's Girl Scout cookie orders. He wondered if her little girl was now one of those things. Gary snapped back to cold reality and swung the bat with both hands, crushing the creature's face with the full weight of the blow. As she fell, he glimpsed a jagged bite mark across her exposed abdomen, entrails spilling outwards and drawing the other undead towards her like sharks to a bloody feast. "No, keep going! Get inside! Gotta get inside!" he gasped, already winded and drenched in putrid gore as he staggered backwards towards the parking structure's entrance. The steel doors had been propped open, providing a temporary refuge for the dwindling cluster of survivors huddled within. Cheryl stood framed at the entrance, eyes wide and pleading amidst a face streaked with tears and viscera, even as the vile contagion overtook her body, clinging to the last fading ember of their shared humanity. "Don't give up. Don't let them take you too," Gary managed between ragged breaths, forcing himself to hold the breach as a few of the clerk and the businessman helped Cheryl retreat back inside the relative safety. As if scenting its living prey attempting to flee, the horde intensified in deafening fervor, a wave of undead crashing towards the unraculated entrance like a tsunami of death itself. Gary planted his feet, squared his stance, and steadied the bat with both hands. He drew a deep breath, preparing for the inevitable onslaught that would soon swallow him as well into the ranks of the living dead. "Come on, you bastards," he growled, grimace defiance etched his bloody face. "Let's end this." As the tidal wave of shrieking, clawing undead slammed into him, Gary swung the bat with every last ounce of desperate fury coursing through his veins. A final battle cry tore from his lungs, echoing into the damned night. Again, I really like a story that ends poorly for the protagonist. It's kind of weird and kind of messed up, but it's just the kind of stories I enjoy. I thought this came out pretty good. I was actually really surprised. I like the idea of just a normal person being thrust into any situation like this. I just use an accountant because that's what I'm used to. So I hope you enjoyed the story. Come back next time for some more scary stories. And as always, remember to face your fears.